Hello and welcome to this really interesting live broadcast. I'm here today, Simon Haigh, with Owen Fitzpatrick. Owen, how are you?
I'm very good, Simon. How are you doing?
I'm good. And you're one of the few people with a longer bio than me, but I'll try my best. So, Owen is very incredible. Very highly accoladed. Is a psychologist, international best-selling author, speaker, trainer. Has a master's in applied psychology. He's traveled the world to more than 100 countries, spoken to audiences in over 30 of them. His books have been translated into more than 20 languages. You've shared the stage with the likes of Richard Branson, Seth Godin. Your TEDx talk, Mind Control, has been viewed by more than 1.3 million people. You studied strategic negotiation, persuasion in Harvard Business School, MIT, and it goes on and on. You've worked with billionaires, Olympic athletes, companies like Google, LinkedIn, Pfizer, Ogilvy, Barclays. I mean, you can't really argue with a bio like that, Owen. So welcome again. And we're talking about resilience, the psychology and neuroscience of resilience, which is something that obviously, we all are talking about nowadays. And resilience is a buzzword. And, I often talk about, resilience is the capacity to cope with life, the ups and the downs of life. And for you, what do you see resilience as? What are your thoughts on it?
So, Simon, I suppose for me, resilience is the ability to bounce back from adversity. And so coping with the ups and downs of life, a lot of the time, change itself can be adversity. So the good times and the bad times can both have adversity in them. When things change for the better, great, but it's still change. And from a neurological point of view, the brain doesn't always like change. The brain likes things to be the same. Our brains are a prediction machine. Our brains literally survive based upon prediction. It's really, your brain is in a black box in your head, and through what it's sensing in your body, through what it's sensing outside of you, through your senses, and through the memories it has, it tries to figure out what's going to happen next. And so navigating those ups and downs, as you mentioned, which I like the definition, is really handling adversity and making sure that when things happen, you can bounce back from them. But actually, I think there's an even better term that I like to use than resilience, that I spend a lot of time using, and it was coined by Nicholas Nassim Taleb, called Antifragility, in his book Antifragile. And this is different to resilience in that, let's say something that's fragile, let's say a glass, you throw at the wall. If you're in a really bad humor, you throw it at the wall, it smashes because it's fragile. Something that's anti-fragile isn't just, resilient, that you throw it at the wall and then it bounces off, or it's hurt, but then it gets back to its shape. Something that's anti-fragile actually becomes stronger the more it's subjected to adversity. And this is also something that they talk about in science called post-traumatic growth. We've heard a lot about PTSD and post-traumatic stress disorder, but there's also post-traumatic growth. And to me, anti-fragility, this ability to bounce back better, is something that we should be looking to do. Very simple example of it would be your muscles. When you work out, if you lift weights, you break down muscle fibers. And in response to that, your muscles then grow bigger because our muscles are anti-fragile. And in many ways, when we adjust the way we think about adversity, we adjust the way we think about the ups and downs, I believe that we can get to a point where we're not just resilient, which is grand and great and worth looking for, but we can become anti-fragile as well. We can make it so that the adversity we face, the changes we face, the difficulties we face, actually make us stronger and better as a result of them, if that makes sense.
Well, no, it does. And it's funny. And I hadn't read that book and I wasn't honestly aware of this stuff, but I use the term anti-fragility techniques when I work with companies who want to improve their cohesion and their inclusion and grow. I talk about anti-fragility techniques. So it's cool to hear that. And, you're so right. It's about bouncing back. I mean, without going into my story, there's two parts to me. There's the online LinkedIn portfolio resume version, but there's also, I've been through significant trauma and stuff in life. And we've all had our own versions of it. And when I look back, and I've written about this on a website, mindsetandmindfulness.com. And when I look back, there is some sort of magical grain of hope or whatever it is that gets you over the line, right? When you're in that real dark place, certainly for me anyway, there was something that, if I could bottle what it was that kept me going, right? When I was like broken, like I assumed I'd lost everything, right? What do you think that is? What is that thing that just keeps, when we're down, keeps pulling us back up? What if we could encapsulate that? What is that?
Well, I think it's a natural human phenomenon that we have that keeps us moving forward, right? Because no matter what happens, there's always that element of hope. We could describe it as hope. But from a neurological point of view, without getting too nerdy, but from a neurological point of view, the brain has really two types of emotional reactions. So two types of neurochemicals that tend to affect it. There's what we call the here and now chemicals, which are molecules such as serotonin, which makes us feel contented, comfortable about everything, or endocannabinoids, which is what is released when we're exercising, or endorphins, which is what is released when we feel pain to make us feel better. There's a whole infinite array of a plethora of different types of neurochemicals to do with the here and now. But then there's the other side, which is the wanting stuff. And this is the thing that drives us, that is connected to it, what we call a desire circuit in our brain, and makes us want things. And I believe that hope definitely is connected to this, is that whenever we're in a situation where there's darkness, there's always this ability to look for the light. Just like, by the way, the flip side, when everything is going well, it can be very easy to think to yourself, oh no, what's going to happen next wrong?
Yeah.
We have a habit to always look for what's not there. We have a habit to always think about this. And to me, I think what we need to do is recognize that the real trick to everything really comes down to balance. It's the ability to understand that when things are going, like Jim Rohn, the famous motivational speaker, gave a great example. He said, there are 4 seasons in life. There's the spring full of opportunity. There's the summer where things are great. There's the autumn where things start to look a little, and then there's the winter, which is the dark times. What we need to remember is when we're in summer, we need to prepare a plan for the winter. And when we're in winter, we need to remember that spring will follow. Day follows night, right? It's the darker it is. There's a great quote about, the darker it is, the closer it is to morning. So the closer it is to the light. And I think we need to recognize that, whatever we want to call it, hope, belief, faith, or light even, that metaphor that we use, that's something that will really help us, because again, kind of like being the underdog, we deal with adversity, but when we can have that glimpse of hope, it can allow us to be able to emerge and rise from the adversity more powerful as a result.
That's perfectly put. And I often talk, when I'm going through good times, I put money in my bank, right? Which means I do things to when things go wrong, which they will, because we all have good days, bad days, will galvanize me a little bit. So when I'm good, when I'm in a good period, I do exercise, or I'll do whatever it takes to put money in the bank to protect me, because I know one day I'm going to need that, right? So that's interesting. And, we're going through a circuit breaker time with this pandemic. I mean, I think this is the first time that every human being on this planet knows the same thing is happening to the world, right? This pandemic. And how would you say this is different to the challenges we've faced, certainly in the West, since World War II? How is this different?
Well, I mean, it's different in terms of the scope, and it's different in terms of the access we have to it. So everywhere you go, it's the pandemic, right? You turn on the TV, it's the pandemic. You go on social media, it's the pandemic. Lockdown is a part of everything. We're all in the same boat. And in many ways, whenever we're in a situation where bad things are happening, we used to be able to look for the expert that would be able to help us out of there, right? That would be able to give us some advice. We look for those people to be able to do it. But now they're in the same boat as us. We're all, in this ship. And so what do we do about that? What we need to be able to do is we need to be able to recognize that this is something we've never faced before. Massive amounts of uncertainty, massive amounts of volatility. They call it the VUCA world. And now that's like the VUCA world on crack almost, right? Yeah. Because it's volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. It's so impacted. And so what we need to do in a time like that is we need to recognize that this has to be, once again, coming back to the anti-fragility concept, this has to be the meaning that we give to it. We need to give meaning to the adversity we face. And there's lots of adversity we face on an everyday basis, right? Before the pandemic, there was adversity. There's, getting into an argument with your best friend. There's relationships ending. There's losing your job. There's having a fight with your family. There's losing somebody. There's getting sick. There's all these horrible things that can happen to us. But when we go through it, it's almost like we go through it individually, and we know, because we got lots of examples of other people that have been through the same thing, that one day the sun will shine again. Sometimes when everyone is in the lockdown and there's uncertainty, it can be difficult to realize that, but it's critical that we do. It's critical that we recognize that the sun will shine again, that
Yeah.
things will get better, that we will overcome whatever we're facing, and that we need to be the leaders in many ways. In many ways, Simon, when you're on LinkedIn, you're sharing on an everyday basis a lot of great ideas, a great insights that inspire people and that educate people. That's what I try to do as well in my LinkedIn profile, in owenfitzpatrick.com. I try to provide content that inspires people and teaches people to be able to overcome the hurdles that they're facing and give them the skills that they need. But we all need to see ourselves as the leaders. We all need to see ourselves as the guides.
I 100% agree. And I'm very conscious when I put things on LinkedIn. Yes, of course, there's ego. Yes, of course, there's self-promotion. But for me, it's about helping shine a light on other people's confidence to match their confidence with their capability. That's really important for me, is that I have a job to do to help others, right? Because I'm not just, if it's just me in this world, it's going to be pretty dark place. It's going to be pretty sad place. So what about neuroscience? So I'm not an expert in neuroscience. I've read quite a lot around it. I read a great book called Buddha's Brain. I've read a really good book called Into the Magic Shop by James Doty, who's an American neurosurgeon who, and it's a really, really graphic, visceral book. He's operating on the one hand, and then he remembers back to childhood and, the trauma that he went through, and the secrets to the life for him, which were relax your body, relax your mind, set your goals. But number 3, most people overlook, which is have an honest self-reflection. Look at what you really want in life. So I know a little bit around it, but what insights come from neuroscience, do you think, that would on a day-to-day level, for people who are not experts, will help them deal with adversity? What other insights?
Sure. So the main thing would be the concept of neuroplasticity. So basically, Simon, the way the brain works is that we have about 86 billion neurons in our brain. And out of those, we've lots and lots of connections between those neurons. So think about it like all of these neurons as stations, and there's lots of trains going to and from each of the stations. And they're called synaptic connections, right? So the signals, the information goes across the synapses. These trains go from station to station. Now, the thing is that when we're born with an infinite array of synaptic connections. So as babies, we're born with a certain amount that we keep growing neurons as a baby, but we keep noticing and building more and more connections. And then as we get older, we start to what we call prune those. So we start to cut off all the connections that don't actually that really aren't associated together. We learn that where patterns don't exist as opposed to just where they do. But our brains are constantly looking to try to create patterns and associations. Remember, our brain wants to predict what's going on, so it creates patterns in order to be able to do that. Now, from an adversity point of view, what happens is not just what happens to us, but it's also the way our brain interprets it, and it's the meaning our brain gives to it. And so the first thing is to recognize that neuroplasticity means that we can change the synaptic connections between neurons. It's not as easy as it was when, from 0 to 25 years old, but it still is possible. We just have to put enough attentionality to it. And so the way in which we need to do this is we need to change the meaning of what these past events meant to us. And we need to change the meaning of what the current crises that we face or the future adversity we face means. And so it's all about meaning. When you give a different meaning to an experience, it changes the synaptic connections around that. It changes the way you describe it to yourself, and therefore your brain starts to think differently about it. So then that begs the question, well, how do you do that? How do you actually operationalize the changing of synapses? Well, the first thing is we need to ask different questions, because as soon as you ask a question, you set up a pattern in your brain where your brain starts to look at the adversity in a way that it's never done before. And so the kind of questions you might ask would be, how is this useful, right? So we think about the pandemic, we think about the adversity we faced. How is it useful, me going through the last year in lockdown? We could ask ourselves, what have I learned from this, right? So what am I better at as a result of this? Where's the opportunity in this particular thing? And what's an empowering meaning I can give to these experiences? When we ask things like that, like about what we can learn, how it's an opportunity, how it makes me better, what meaning, positive meaning I can give to my experiences, all of a sudden what you're doing is you're creating a new connections in your brain when you think about the same stimulus, which is the adversity, and it allows you to feel more empowered and more able to tackle it and to deal with it effectively.
That's so well put. And one of the questions I was going to ask you, but I'm going to change it slightly, was, how do you get over huge life events that impact you? But let me just change this slightly, because what the journey I've been through, I've been through a huge amount of life experiences. I've also educated myself. I've also had commercial experiences that altogether have galvanized me to have an awareness that I'm pretty resilient, right? I can actually deal with the big things that go wrong. I can, right? Because I've proven I can. But for me, it's the little things, right? It's the little annoying things, like if somebody doesn't, turn up for this, or if I get a letter through the post and the bill is a little bit higher than I thought it would be. They're the things that, when you see somebody walking a dog and the dog just suddenly bolts to sniff a tree or something, they're the things that seem to derail me personally, right? Why do you think, Owen, that would happen when, somebody like me, I know I'm very resilient, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even those little things still derail me. What happens there?
So what happens, and again, I think a lot of people listening can relate to that, right? So what happens in the brain is simple. So there's a guy called Daniel Gilbert who wrote a great book called Stumbling on Happiness. And the main conclusion of this book, right, he's a researcher, was that people are never as happy as they think they'll be whenever a certain good thing happens. And people are never as destroyed as they'll be whenever a bad thing happens, right? So that's the main theory. And what happens, let's say you face adversity, Simon, and you're resilient. One of the main reasons you're resilient is because, and again, just to get a little bit technical, from a neurochemical point of view, we talked about dopamine. And dopamine is a chemical in the brain to do with motivation, to do with, anticipation of rewards. And what happens is whenever you look for something and what happens is exceeds your expectations, then you get a hit of dopamine and you're way more motivated. Whenever something happens and it diminishes in terms of it's lower than what you expected, then necessarily you've less dopamine and you feel pretty down and deflated. And so what happens is that when you're in a really bad situation, two things happen. Number one, the bad event that happens to you that destroys you, you're now in a place where you're like, it's not as bad as I thought it would be, right? So so you don't get the negative dopamine. You actually get a bit of positive dopamine released, right? Because you're thinking, this isn't as bad as I thought it would be, right? And part of you is thinking that. But second of all, most people love the underdog story. Think about most sports metaphors, most sports stories. It's like the Rocky, right? The Any Given Sunday. It's those things, the Rudy, that inspires us, that makes us feel, this is what it's about. I'm the same in terms of the COVID crisis when it happened. I actually did, I felt quite strong. I was able to deal with it really well because in that moment we're the underdog, and we kind of like being the underdog, right? We enjoy that as Irish people as well. We love being the underdog. But when something smaller happens, right, a little thing, we shouldn't get pissed off by it. We shouldn't get annoyed by it. We shouldn't allow it to ruffle our feathers. And so the dopamine is less as a result. So from a pure neurochemical point of view, we can sort of get a good idea as to why it happens and why we react in a negative, responsive way, because we don't have the luxury of being the underdog and facing this big old monster. It's like a mosquito. If I ask you what animal is responsible for killing more human beings on the planet, right? It might be humans, but I think if we're talking about animals and insects, it's the mosquito. The mosquito kills more people than snakes, right? And it's so small, but it's the little things that can sometimes make the difference at that.
You're so right. No, I think that's right. And so for anybody who hasn't had to think about resilience or hasn't felt like they've had to put a blanket of resilient protection around them, but they're now feeling a bit challenged, right? A bit challenged. So for new beginners to this area, what bits of advice or what suggestions would you give somebody to allow them into the world of resilience to help them protect themselves? What initial bits of advice would you give?
Sure. So for someone who's just sort of feels like nothing really bad has ever happened to them that significantly, I'd say first and foremost, there's a great technique called perspective shifting. And what that means is basically that you look for, you ask yourself the question, how would I be thinking about this in 10 years time? So whatever you're going through, you say, right, how would I be thinking about this in 2031? What age will I be? And how will I look back at this moment right now? Because when you shift perspective, it gets you a different insight, a different way of thinking. If you can shift perspective with another person, you can go, how would this person be? If this person went through this, like if Richard Branson or Elon Musk went through this, or Sheryl Sandberg went through this experience, how would they be perceiving this? Right? What would they do to be able to turn this around? Right? It's looking for the opportunity to be able to find out how someone else would think about things. And even if you don't know, the ability to guess gives you new insights, which makes it less difficult for you to deal with. The second thing I would suggest is gratitude. Practice every single day writing out the things that you feel grateful for, specific things, because that in turn will help you not only be more optimistic, but also increases your resilience, because it gets you to focus on all the things you should feel grateful for as opposed to the other things. And then the third thing I would recommend is describe your emotions. Become quite articulate with describing exactly what you feel. Write it out, maybe journal, put it out onto paper, because when you do it, it kind of gives you a little bit more emotional distance. So you're less likely to be able to be as impacted by it. And then the fourth thing, just to add, is focus on the controllables. Focus on what you can do. There's a million things you can't do. So focus on what you can do. Create a plan, figure out what you can do, and focus on that. Where you put your attention, you can control that, right? What you do first thing you wake up in the morning, you can control that. What you do before you go to bed at night, you can control that. You can control all of this. So make sure that you're making the decision to take charge and focus on what you can do as opposed to what you can't. So if you're just learning for the first time about dealing with adversity, then that would be some suggestions that would help.
No, it's amazing, because you've mentioned 12-step programs and addiction programs. They use exactly the same techniques, gratitude lists and journals, and exactly the same. From a corporate perspective, what can a company do to help employees? And this is an area of interest for me, because I work in the whole area of inclusive and cohesive business, and it's very hard nowadays with remote workforces, and there's a lack of knowledge management, and it's very difficult to mentor youngsters because they're not in the office. What can companies do to help their employees be more resilient?
I think there's a few things. First of all, I think regular coaching and training is important. It really is important to make sure that you're constantly helping them to grow and improve. I similar to yourself, maybe, Simon, I deliver a lot of trainings, all of them obviously virtual at the moment, but I deliver trainings in influence and storytelling and leadership and motivation, even remote working and stuff. And the workshops that I deliver, the companies that bring me in to deliver them, the reason that works so well, or that's important, is even the gesture itself helps the people believe we're not alone in this. We're being given tools to be able to deal with it. And especially these professional skills, sometimes called soft skills, but it's not a good word for them, but for professional skills, allow them to be able to deal and cope with the challenge that they face. So the company isn't just, here's these technical skills, now go figure this out. It's teaching them the professional skills really supported. So coaching, training, I'd say, demonstrate you value the growth mindset. The growth mindset is, for those of you who don't know, Carol Dweck's work, where Professor Carol Dweck from Stanford, where she talked about the fact that some people have a fixed mindset, which is, this is how I am, how I'll always be, versus a growth mindset, I can improve, I can grow, I can adapt. And people with growth mindsets are more likely to live longer, more likely to be more successful, more likely to be happier, more likely to be healthier, all have happier relationships, do better in exams. So we need to promote this growth mindset. And the growth mindset is promoted by always helping people to see that they're making progress, inviting people to make changes, helping people to be able to grow and get better, and constantly reaffirming that they can do that. And always focusing on how they can learn and what they can learn. And so the culture of the organization should be something where you're constantly emphasizing learning, constantly emphasizing curiosity, which is becoming more popular now, constantly emphasizing creative thinking, critical thinking, constantly emphasizing strategy, strategic thinking, and focusing on objectives. And when you start to develop and create a culture whereby all your communication from social media to media internally in your organization does this, when you're providing training opportunities, you're providing initiatives that really start to boost their levels of curiosity and interest, when you diversify, all of those things are going to be immensely valuable to help a company become more resilient and anti-fragile down the line.
Just bringing this towards an end, I mean, given what the shock to the world with the pandemic and the way it's thrown up so many challenges around remote working and the use of technology and the office landscape and the city landscape, do you think that resilience, or another word for it, maybe anti-fragility, will become more of the important corporate language going forward? Do you think do you think companies should, probably yes, but will take this more seriously? Or do you think we'll just revert back to just taking things for granted again?
I mean, look, I want to be optimistic. I want to say, people are going to take it seriously, and now we've done it. I'm yet to be convinced that this is going to be something that people will value, because oftentimes it's the shiny object. And there's lots of trendsetters out there that emphasize this, that, and the other. And to a degree, resilience is being taken very seriously now, but at the same time, it's now almost becoming exhausting. So many people are talking about it. A lot of times when people talk about these concepts, as you know, Simon, they don't actually say very much, right? They're not getting into practical strategies. What can you do to do it? So the problem that we're facing at the moment is there's a massive amount of people talking, but there's a lot of noise. And what we need is we need to figure out the signal inside of that. And the signal really inside of the noise are the practical things that people can do. So do I think that companies will take it more seriously? I think some will. Some will recognize that resilience isn't just something you need through COVID times. This is something you need in the post-COVID, the new world we live in. Why? Because the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity of the VUCA world, plus all of the challenges hurtling, plus most important than ever, change. Change is adversity, right? Change in a good way is adversity. Change in a bad way is adversity. Whenever your life changes, it creates this. And we need to be able to recognize that one of the most important skill sets we have is our ability to demonstrate resilience and anti-fragility, or whatever, like we said, we want to call it, to have skills like that, to learn tools like that, to deal with the change and adversity we face.
No, that's perfect. It just makes me think now that I use a model called the 3R model, which for corporates. So all corporates are governed by 3 R's: revenue at the top of the pyramid, risk at the left, and reputation. Revenue, risk, reputation. But maybe we should put a new one in the middle, resilience in the middle. You know, I hadn't thought of that before. I hadn't thought that until now.
And the alliteration works great. So, you know.
So how do people find out more about you and connect with you?
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn. So obviously, you know, I post regularly on LinkedIn. OwenFitzpatrick.com is my website, Owen Fitzpatrick.com. But I also have a free masterclass tomorrow for anyone that's interested in influence. It's called, if you go to OwenFitzpatrick.com/influence, and it's at 7 p.m. Irish time, but, you know, there'll be a replay for a week later, but it's an hour, and it's all about mastering persuasion and getting a yes. So it's 7 different tricks I've learned over the years, 7 different steps towards persuading anyone, anywhere, anytime. So if anyone's interested, OwenFitzpatrick.com/influence. But besides that, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm also OwenFitzpatrick.com.
That's wonderful. Owen, it's been great talking to you. We could talk forever, but we got work to do. So it'd be great chatting with you, and take care. Great. Thanks very much.
Look forward to the next time. Thanks, Simon. Take care.
Bye. Bye. Bye-bye.